Good evening, friends, and welcome to History for Sleep. Tonight, I've brought you a quiet, calming tale, a gentle bedtime, sleep story for wakeful minds and wandering hearts. This video is part of the Boring History for Sleep Stories series, made to help you unwind and fall asleep fast. In this episode, I'll share soothing sleep stories that invite your thoughts to slow down and your body to let go. If your mind is still busy, or if peace feels far away, you've found the right place. So gently close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let these sleep-inducing chronicles of history carry you into rest. You're silent. Night begins now, with History for Sleep. Story 1. The Midnight Grind, a Viking woman's endless loom. The quiet before the thread. Tonight. You find yourself at the edge of a small Viking farmstead. The evening sky is a deep, heavy blue, pressing softly on the low sod roofs that peek out from the rocky earth. You can hear the thin whistle of the wind as it curves around wooden planks and the muffled cough of a sheep somewhere behind the house. Inside, a woman kneels beside a loom so tall it nearly grazes the beams of the sloping roof. Her name might have been Gunhild, though the sagas rarely mention the names of women who did not fight or rule. Still, her story lingers in the soft scrape of her fingers on flax fibers and the muted rhythm of her foot against the loom weight by the glow of an oil lamp. Fat from last autumn's slaughter, rendered into a trembling flame, you watch her roll out a pale length of woolen warp threads. The lamp smells of smoke and tallow, a smell that clings to every blanket and undertunic in the house. Outside, frost collects on the thatch, turning each blade of straw into a tiny silver spear. In this corner of the world, cloth is life. The thread binds the hearth and the sea, shields the body from cold winds that sweep across the fjords, and shapes the sails that will someday vanish over a restless horizon. Gunhild does not think of these far-off journeys tonight. Her mind is quiet, turned inward to the warp and weft. With each pass of the shuttle, she breathes in, then out, as if weaving not only the wool, but the very rhythm of her days. The wool comes from sheep she tends herself. In summer, she follows them across rocky pastures, shooing them from cliff edges and leading them through fog so thick that even the birds fall silent. She knows each sheep's patterns, the one that favors the low mossy patches, the one that always lingers by the shore. In autumn, she shears them, her fingers cramped from the weight of the wool. Then she cleans the fleeces in icy water, wringing each piece until her wrists ache. Under the open sky, she beats the wet wool with sticks, flicking away burrs and bits of lichen. Winter brings this loom work, long nights, where the moon hovers low and watchful beyond the smoke hole. She hums, sometimes, but mostly she listens to the hiss of the wind or the soft yawn of the logs as they shift in the hearth. As you watch her tonight, you might notice the small lines at the corners of her eyes, lines from squinting into snow, glare from squinting at fine threads. Her hair is bound in a simple knot, no beads, no bright ribbon. Beads are for festivals and bright ribbons for brides. Tonight is for warmth, not beauty. The children sleep close by, curled in heaps of furs. One stirs, murmuring in some half-dream, and she pauses. Her eyes drift over them, perhaps a silent prayer to Frigg for safe dreams. Then she turns back to the loom. A gentle clack, a sigh of wool, and another inch of cloth creeps down, in. A few weeks, this bolt might become a new cloak for her eldest, or trade goods at a summer market, or maybe a burial shroud, though she does not think of that tonight. Outside, a lone wolf howls, a long wavering note that threads through the icy night. She doesn't startle. It is a sound as familiar as the creak of her loom, the pulse of her own breath. You rest here beside her, feeling the slow warmth of the lamp and the subtle vibration of each loom beat. The room is dim, soft-edged, as though the world has lost its sharpness for a moment, and you wonder how many unseen hands shaped the sails that carried raiders south. How many fingers bled to make tunics for chieftains and woolen bands for infants. The loom sighs on, slow and gentle, beneath the gaze of the winter moon. What dreams does she spin into each thread, and what secrets hide between the warp and the weft? Threads across the frost when you awaken, or perhaps you were never quite asleep. The lamp has burned lower, a teardrop of oil clinging to the rim. Gunhild still sits at her loom. Outside, the pale hint of dawn barely teases the eastern edge of the fjord, like a thumb smudging grey pigment along a sheet of vellum. You listen to the hush of the house, the soft snore of her husband, the rustle of straw as the children turn, and beneath it all, the steady heartbeat of the loom dot. Today she weaves not only to clothe her family, but to repay a debt. Earlier in spring, her brother needed iron nails to repair his fishing boat, a task that could not wait if he was to catch the cod runs. Gunhild promised a length of wool cloth in exchange, fine enough to please the blacksmith and strong enough to become cloaks or sails or sacks. Each row is a kind of promise, an echo of barter agreements woven into thread. You notice the walls of the longhouse, hung with fish skins drying into translucent flags, with birch bark baskets that smell faintly of sap and moss. On a high shelf, a few glass beads shimmer, bright blue and deep green, treasures brought back from a summer voyage to the east. She keeps them out of reach, reminders of distant lands and the sparkle of river markets far beyond the grey waves. Gunhild's hands are rough, her nails split and rimmed with wool grease. Each callus is a small story. The spring when lambing went badly and she barely slept for 3 weeks. The summer she helped strip bark from birches to twist into cord. The many winters she knelt here by this same loom, chasing warmth and light in the short days. A small child stirs again and pants. Over to her, you see his tiny hand tugging at the hem of her tunic, thumb in his mouth. She bends, presses her forehead to his, and her lips curve into the softest, fleeting smile. She gently nudges him back toward the furs, and he collapses into them as though he were made of fog and sea foam. She returns to the warp, slipping the shuttle through with a practiced flick. In the far end of the house, a pot of thin barley gruel bubbles over faint embers, emitting a smell that is both sour and comforting, a gluey memory of stored grain and last autumn's scant harvest. In the Viking Age, women like Gunhild often controlled the keys to the house and the chest where silver and cloth were kept. Cloth, in fact, was so valuable it could be used as currency, a measure of wealth, as telling as rings of silver or the weight of a sword. You imagine her walking to a market, the cloth rolled and tied, perhaps scented faintly with juniper smoke or lanolin. Men might weigh hacksilver in rough scales. Women might finger the weave and discuss dye shades in hushed, precise tones. A darker blue fetched higher prices, and red, if she could ever afford madder root, was prized beyond measure, but for now, her world is this single length of cloth, each thread as intimate as a heartbeat. A sparrow lands on the roof, its claws scratching lightly above her head. The day brightens by degrees, as if the sun were being gently persuaded to rise. By old songs and whispered prayers, a thin layer of frost glints on the steps outside. She finally pauses to stand, her knees stiff. She crosses to the fire, lifts the pot of gruel, and ladles it into wooden bowls. The children stow awake in waves, small fists rubbing eyes, hair matted like seaweed after a storm. One by one, they drift to her, settling around the hearth with sleepy, open mouths. She hums a low tune as she serves them. An old song learned from her mother, who learned it from her own mother beneath another roof by another fjord. The song is not meant to entertain, but to soothe. A sound that softens the shape of the morning and fills the house with warmth before the day's chores unravel. When her husband rises, he moves slowly, the way a bear emerges from a den. He carries the heavy smell of sweat and sea, and you see the soft respect, almost shy, with which he takes his bowl. They exchange few words, each one heavy with winter's hush. After the meal, Gunhild cleans the bowls and gathers scraps for the sheepdogs outside. She steps out into the white-laced yard, the cold immediately coiling around her ankles. She tosses the scraps and watches the dogs wrestle for them, a brief, wild dance against the solemn dawn. Beyond the dogs, she squints toward the fjord, trying to read the day's story in the curve of the waves. The sea is quiet, almost sullen. Somewhere far beyond, ships drift between islands, carrying traders or raiders, or both. She pulls her shawl closer, breath fogging before her dot when she returns. Inside, the house feels warmer, though the fire has barely grown. She rubs her hands and sits again at the loom. The children begin small tasks. One mends a net, another scrubs a wooden spoon smooth, another simply listens, still half adrift in sleep's gentle tide. Hours slip by unnoticed. Outside, the dogs curl into balls of fur, snow beginning to crust lightly on their backs. The thin daylight stretches briefly, like a cat yawning, before it begins to slide away again. Gunhild switches from weaving to spinning, taking raw wool and teasing it into slender strands with a spindle. The spindle twists downward, a small, silent dance as her fingers gently coax the fibers. You watch the dance for long minutes. Twist, pinch, release. Twist, pinch, release. Sometimes she stops to warm her hands at the hearth. Her fingers are red and swollen at the joints, but she never flinches. To her, the pain is an old friend, a shadow that follows her along every season. She drinks a thin broth from a horn cup, savoring each swallow as though it were mead. Her lips glisten briefly, and then she licks them clean, wiping away a stray thread caught on her chin. Evening creeps in again, a blue fog at the edges of the world. The children gather around her, weaving small straw dolls or humming half-remembered tunes. One child, the eldest daughter, holds up a newly finished doll and pretends to rock it to sleep. Gunhild smiles faintly, her eyes distant. Perhaps she remembers a doll of her own, or perhaps she sees a future where her daughter, too, will lean over a loom, weaving cloth and life together in the hush of winter nights. The lamp is refilled and lit again. Its flame dances softly on the rough wooden beams, casting gentle shadows like soft waves across the walls. As darkness presses close, Gunhild stands, stretches her arms overhead, and checks the cloth's progress. She runs her fingers across the woven section, feeling for lumps or thin spots. The cloth is solid and tight, good enough to withstand salty sea spray or a sudden downpour. You see her pause, fingertips resting on the wool as if listening for a voice only she can hear. In that stillness, you almost hear it too, a quiet hum beneath the threads, a secret murmured by each fibre as it locks into place, the loom, the hearth, the family breathing softly around her. These are her world, her saga, the great ships, and high-seated jarls may earn the stories and the songs. But here, in this soft, persistent labour, lie the truest epics. A new log is added to the fire. Sparks leap and twist like startled birds before settling into a warm glow. The children's eyelids droop. The daughter places the straw doll beside her head, thumb pressed to her lips. Gunhild slips once more to the loom, lifting the shuttle, in a final gesture before rest. Her shoulders soften, her breath evens, and she looks into the flickering shadows that dance like distant stars on the wall. You wonder what dreams will find her tonight. Will she dream of deep fjords and silver, fish, or of warm summer grass under bare feet? Will she hear the seas hush, or the echo of her mother's songs winding through the halls of memory? Perhaps she will dream of cloth that stretches endlessly, a river of wool flowing out to sea, carrying her hopes and weariness on its gentle current dot. In this quiet twilight, you are part of her story, a silent witness to the softest moments of a life woven in small, tender gestures. When the shuttle stops and the hearth cools, what warmth remains in the weave? In the weft of memory, the night outside is thick and endless, as if the world beyond the small sod house has dissolved into pure shadow. The moon is a hidden friend tonight, resting somewhere behind the shroud of clouds and sea fog. Only the low, irregular crackle of the hearth keeps time with Gunhild's breathing. You find her seated again at the loom, though now the children lie still, each one wrapped in their small universe of furs and straw pillows. Her husband has long since curled into his own blanket, a quiet mountain of flesh that rises and falls in slow tides. Gunhild holds a spindle in one hand, rolling it absently. The wool threads curl around her fingers like pale, wandering snakes. Her eyes are half closed, and for a moment you wonder if she dreams with her eyes open, if she has slipped into that thin place between wakefulness and sleep where the past drifts up like a ghostly ship in the fog. The weight of winter lies heavy on her shoulders. The outside world is locked in frost, the paths slick with ice that even the goats avoid. The sea groans under slabs of drifting ice, and the fishing nets hang limp in the shed like abandoned skins. Yet, in this quiet hour, her mind travels far beyond the frozen shorelines. She recalls the summers of her girlhood, mornings when the mist glowed pink over the fjord, when she and her mother waded into knee-deep grass to gather sweet herbs and yarrow. The sky then felt like a ceiling of soft wool, low enough to brush with her fingertips. Her mother would talk to her of dyes, how lichen made soft yellows, how the crushed madder root gave that sacred red, and how iron pots could darken the yarn into midnight blues that caught the eye of the richest traders. Each dye was a kind of magic, a whispered spell over bubbling vats and steaming baskets. Gunhild misses that warmth, her mother's voice, the smell of wet grass and crushed petals now. Each dye is harder to come by. Each vibrant hue costs silver or a favour, and in lean years she cannot spare either. Still, she sometimes tucks away small scraps of coloured wool in a woven pouch, tokens of brighter seasons. These she will not trade, no matter the hunger in winter or the sharp tongue of a merchant demanding a price. The cloth before her is nearly finished now. Its tight weave gleams softly in the lamplight, a pale river flowing downward. She runs her hand across it, feeling the subtle ridges, the firmness that promises warmth, protection, life. When the loom finally stands empty again, she will take it apart, oil the beams with fish oil, store it along the back wall until another batch of wool is spun and washed. The loom's pieces are heavy but familiar, as much a part of her body as her calloused fingers or the curve of her spine. She rises briefly to check the children. Their faces are softened by sleep, slack and glowing in the half-light. Each breath sounds like a wave curling over smooth stones. She brushes a lock of hair from her daughter's brow, tucks the fur tighter around her youngest. You follow her movements slowly, almost as if you, too, are drifting inside a dream. Each motion is deliberate, measured, like a slow dance with memory. Back at the loom, she begins to untie the last warp threads from the bottom beam. Her fingers nimble despite the stiffness that creeps in during cold nights. With each release, the cloth slackens a little, sagging like a tired body. She hums a tune again, that same low melody passed down from her mother, soft as wind through dry rushes in the dim corners of the house. Small items whisper of her daily life. A pair of bone combs left on a shelf, a broken spindle tip resting in a cup of ashes, a half-finished basket for storing dried herbs. These quiet companions bear witness to her invisible labor, the unspoken architecture of survival. Tomorrow she will begin preparing the cloth for trade. She brush it, trim stray threads, fold it carefully into a tight roll bound by a strip of old linen. The cloth must impress. It will be her voice at the market, her argument for fish oil, iron nails, or a rare pot of honey. The journey to the market is not short. She must cross rocky paths along the fjord, where sea spray coats the stones in a treacherous glaze. Sometimes she travels with a neighbor or her sister-in-law. Other times she walks alone, the cloth secured on her, back like an infant. On these walks, she feels the sharp bite of wind on her cheeks and the scent of salt hanging in the air. She listens for distant gulls, for the low grumble of the sea against the cliffs. Each step becomes a silent chant, the rhythm of feet on rock, the rustle of wool against her shoulders, the whisper of waves. She passes mossy cairns left as markers. By ancestors each stone a prayer, a story, a promise to return. Sometimes she stops and adds a new pebble, a quiet gesture to unseen eyes dot. At market, the cloth changes hands quickly. A trader fingers the weave, nods, weighs a small purse of silver in his palm. A brief negotiation, a murmur of approval. Her cloth may sail away on a distant ship to Ireland or down to Frankish lands, its fate unknown. Gonhild never lingers to see it leave. Once the cloth is gone, her mind pivots to grain sacks, smoked fish, or small bits of amber for her daughter's hair. Her attention is always drawn back to the hearth, to the fragile loop of life she must keep spinning back home, as she weaves and dreams tonight. Her thoughts drift to the spring planting, the small patch of barley she tends with her eldest son, the onion bulbs she buries carefully in the thawing earth. She remembers the texture of soil warming under her palms, the smell of the first green shoots when they push bravely through frostbitten ground in summer. She will mend sails for her husband's boat. She will stitch the edges with thick, greasy wool thread, pressing the fabric flat with her whole weight to strengthen it against the biting gales. She will patch nets torn by seals or sharks, sitting on the shore as seaweed tangles around her ankles. During autumn, she dry herbs and roots in the rafters, braid onions, preserve berries in honey if they are lucky enough to gather some. Each task is small but monumental. Each stitch, each turn of the spindle, each loop of yarn is a quiet claim against the cold and dark. These tasks form her true saga, one not sung in mead halls or carved on runestones, but woven silently into every scrap of daily life. The lamp flame flickers low, shadows creeping and coiling across the loom frame. You notice the slight tremor in her fingers now, a small betrayal of fatigue. Yet she continues. In the hush, you begin to feel the loom's steady heartbeat as your own. You sense her soft inhalations, the faint scuff of wool on wood, the gentle rasp of her sleeve as she pushes a thread tight. Her eyes close for a moment, and she leans forward, forehead touching the cloth. Perhaps she prays, perhaps she listens for the voice of her mother, or for the faint echo of distant waves. When she lifts her head again, a softness lingers at the corners of her mouth. She looks at the almost complete cloth, at the final threads, waiting for her patient fingers. How many years has she sat here, you wonder? How many winters have been measured by the length of cloth rather than the arc of the sun? A small ember cracks in the hearth, releasing a thin ribbon of smoke. The children sigh in their sleep, shifting beneath furs that smell of lanolin and sea salt. Finally, Gunhild stands. She stretches her arms upward, joints clicking faintly. She lowers the final beam, gathers the loose ends of the cloth, and lifts it carefully into her lap. The cloth lies heavy, but it is a good weight, the proof of months of care, the quiet triumph of an unseen artist. She folds it gently, tucking the edges under as though wrapping a newborn. Her palms linger over each fold, smoothing, blessing, memorizing. In the morning, she will prepare it for its journey, but tonight it stays here, a warm presence against her knees. Before extinguishing the lamp, she takes a final glance around the room. The loom stands empty now, like a silent sentinel waiting for the next season. The children breathe evenly, their small bodies curved like commas in a story not yet finished. Her husband snores, steady as a tidal current. She rests her head on the cloth and closes her eyes. For a long moment, she simply breathes, the inhale, the exhale, each one rising and falling with the ocean's rhythm beyond the fjord. You watch her drift into sleep, the lines of her face softening, the roughness of her hands relaxing. In her dreams, perhaps she returns to those bright summer meadows, or walks again among moss-covered cairns, or sits by her mother's side, dyeing yarn in bright, impossible colors. Perhaps, in her dream, the loom stands in an endless field of wildflowers, each thread catching the golden light of the midnight sun. Each beat of the shuttle echoing like distant gull calls over calm water in that liminal space. The burdens of fish oil debts, torn sails, and frozen mornings melt away. All that remains is the gentle flow of thread, the hush of waves, and the warmth of a cloth cradled in her arms. What is a legacy, if not a weave of quiet hours and tender labors? What songs are worth more than the steady hush of a woman's breath? Over wool tonight, in this long and slow story, you have shared her vigil. You have heard the loom's heartbeat, and watched the cloth grow inch by inch, thread by tender thread. And so, we leave Gunhild here, cradled in sleep, her loom resting, beside her like an old friend. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new debts, and new threads to spin. But tonight, she dreams only of warmth, of moonlit sheepfields, and of distant sails on quiet seas. Let your breath follow hers now, slow, gentle, unhurried. Imagine the looms, rhythm in your own chest. Feel each thread as a promise of peace, each knot as an invitation to rest. Story 2, Salt, smoke, and sea spray, drying fish at the edge of the world, the salt wind. And now, let's drift into a different time, a different place. You awaken on a rocky shore, your feet cushioned by a mat of tangled seaweed and smooth pebbles. Slick with morning mist, the horizon is endless, an ancient grey mirror broken only by the slow breathing of the waves. A low hum, almost like a deep sigh, shivers across the surface, echoing against the cliffs. You turn toward a small scattering of wooden huts, pressed close together, as if huddled against the cold breath of the North Atlantic. Each roof is thatched with sod and seagrass, the walls patched with driftwood and rough planks that once floated hundreds of miles from unknown lands. The air smells thick with brine and smoke, a scent that clings to every corner of life here. It is both a shield and a memory, the smell of survival. As dawn cracks over the waves, you see shapes moving slowly among the huts. They are bundled in layers of coarse wool and sealskins, pale hair braided tight against the wind. The salt stings their faces. Their eyes squint beneath heavy brows, not from anger, but from years of facing the unrelenting sea glare. Among them, you follow a man named Bjorn. His name means bear, though he is more like a heron, tall, thin, and deliberate. His fingers, long and bony, seem built for untangling nets rather than grasping axes. He has spent more days listening to gulls and waves than to human speech, and in his quiet you sense the outline of his soul. Before the sun fully rises, Bjorn checks the fish racks that line the rocky outcrop beyond the huts. These racks, known as hill, stand like great wooden ribs against the horizon. Thin ropes hang from them, each line bearing dozens of split fish. The fish, mostly cod, sometimes haddock or ling, dangle limp, their scales turned pale and leathery by months of wind and frost. The work begins before even the thought of warmth. Bjorn runs his fingers over each fish, checking for rot, for careless cuts, for the whisper of mold that can ruin a winter's worth of meals and trade. Nearby, a young boy carries buckets of seawater, splashing them carefully over the fish racks. The salt tightens the flesh, preserves it against the sly creep of moisture and pests. You see his arms tremble with each lift, his breath puffing in small white clouds. Bjorn nods at the boy, a small gesture that holds the weight of an entire season's hope back inside the huts. Women begin the morning chores. One stirs a pot of barley and mussels, another scrubs fish guts from wooden bowls, while yet another sharpens knives on a flat stone smoothed by decades of use. The knives gleam dully, the light of dawn catching in their grooves like tiny flickers of ghostly stars. In a corner, an old woman with hair like drifted snow braids strips a fish skin into cords. Her fingers move so gently that you feel you could fall asleep just watching them pinch, twist, tighten, knot. The cords might serve as ties for bundles of dried herbs, for binding new sails, or for patching tears in heavy cloaks. The interior of the hut is dark but alive. Smoke curls around the beams, weaving invisible stories into the air. You notice bundles of dried kelp stacked neatly against the far wall, each piece crackling softly when brushed. Kelp is more than a weed here. It's boiled into broth, burned for salt ash, twisted into baskets to carry mussels and small stones. On a low bench sits a row of iron fish hooks, each one hand-forged and barbed like a small question mark. You sense the silent conversation between each hook and the deep sea, the waiting, the patience, the prayer whispered into black water. Bjorn returns from the racks and slips inside. He does not speak, but he lays a hand on the old woman's. shoulder a wordless thank you for cords that will hold tomorrow's nets. She does not look up, only smiles with the corner of her lips, her eyes fixed on the fish skin. The boy follows, dragging the empty buckets behind him. He flops down on a fur, face flushed, fingers stinging from cold brine. A young girl offers him a cup of weak ale, and he sips it like a blessing, his whole body curling around its warmth. You watch the daily rhythm unfold, the hush of knives, slicing, the tap of wooden ladles on pot rims, the shuffle of fur-wrapped feet on earthen floors. Each sound is a note in a long, quiet song, a lullaby that has rocked this shoreline to sleep for centuries. Outside again, you notice the sea growing, restless. A low wind picks up, flicking grains of sand across the fish racks. The gulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp and lonely. In the distance, a boat approaches, a small craft hewn from pine, the bow lifted proudly like a seabird's breast. This is Eric, Bjorn's cousin, returning with the morning catch. His hands are thick, his forearms ridged like twisted ropes. He heaves the boat up onto the shingle, his boots sinking into the wet sand. You see codtails poking from a rough sack, silver grey and twitching faintly even after hours on deck. Bjorn joins him without a word. Together they lift the fish sack and carry it up to the salting hut, where shallow troughs of course sea salt wait like pale snowdrifts. Each fish is laid open with a single decisive cut. Bjorn works with almost priest-like care, sliding the blade along the spine, pulling flesh away in wide, graceful arcs. The salt stings the raw surfaces instantly, and you can almost hear the flesh tighten under its touch. They move in silence. Only the sea speaks, its eternal hush and hush and hush. In the background, a group of children play at the edge of the tide. They chase each other, leap over kelp ropes, dare each other to touch the icy surf. Their shrieks of laughter pierce the quiet like the glint of sun on a cold blade. Nearby, an older girl collects sea urchins in a woven basket. Her hair is the color of dark honey, her skin red and raw from the salt air. Every so often, she stops to examine a shell or a bit of sea glass, tucking each small treasure into a fold of her tunic. By midday, the sky pales to a delicate, washed-out blue. The sun sits low even at its peak, barely strong enough to warm the sand. Yet every face here seems turned toward it, as though each ray carries a secret promise of survival. Bjorn and Eric finish splitting the fish and move to wash their knives. In the sea, the blades gleam, catching stray droplets of sun like miniature lanterns. Eric flicks a small crab away from his foot with a gentle laugh. A sound so rare and fragile you want to wrap it in cloth and hide it away for later. Inside the huts, the midday meal begins. Bowls of fish stew pass from hand to hand. A thin broth rich with sea flavors fills the air, steaming like a fleeting spirit. Small chunks of root vegetables, gathered from meager gardens or traded inland, float among fish bones and seaweed. The family gathers cross-legged on low benches. Each person eats slowly, savoring every sip. Hunger is a constant companion, but today it sits patiently at the door. The old woman hums softly, an ancient tune that loops and curls around the rising steam. The young boy from earlier leans against her side, his eyelids fluttering. You watch his small chest rise and fall, the hush of sleep pulling him gently into its net. After the meal, the women begin mending nets, the fine cords, woven from twisted sheep's wool and fish skin, stretch across their laps like silken rivers. Each knot is a small poem, each loop a question for the sea. Outside, the wind changes direction. Gulls land on the fish racks, pecking cautiously at the edges of drying. Fillet's a girl runs out with a carved wooden clapper, chasing them off in a flurry of wings and shrill protests. The gulls rise and swirl above the huts like fragments of a broken cloud. Bjorn steps back from the shore and scans the horizon. His eyes narrow against the glare, searching for signs of a distant ship or a change in weather. He smells the shift. In the air, a sharper bite, a promise of rough waves and possible storms. The children gather driftwood and kelp for the smokehouse fires. The crackle of small twigs, the scrape of pebbles, and the laughter echo against the cliffs. Each movement is woven into the fabric of the day, each small task a thread in the tapestry of survival. As afternoon wanes, you see Bjorn and Eric once more at the racks. They adjust ropes, check knots, reposition fish to catch the dying light. The sun now slides lower, a pale coin slipping behind the edge of the world. A small flock of black guillemots flutters past, their wings slicing the air in quick, sharp beats. The sea answers with a hush, as though drawing a blanket over its restless face. The old woman stands at the doorway, watching the men work. Her face, a map of furrows and salt lines, is both stoic and deeply kind. She cups her hands to her mouth and calls something, her voice surprisingly strong. Bjorn lifts a hand in acknowledgement, but does not turn. The light continues to drain from the sky, and the wind grows teeth. Smoke from the cook fires rises straight up at first, then twists sharply out to sea. The children hurry indoors, the last giggles fading like echoes in a cave. Bjorn finally steps away from the racks. His fingers are stiff, and he flexes them, slowly, as though convincing them they still belong to him. He nods to Eric, who shoulders a heavy coil of rope, and together they walk toward the huts, their heads bowed slightly against the cold. Inside, warmth spills softly from the hearth. The young girl with the honey hair stirs a pot, the broth bubbling with renewed vigor. The old woman sits cross-legged, sharpening a small bone needle. She tests its point against her thumb, nods, and sets it aside. Bjorn sits heavily on a bench, his body surrendering to the day's exhaustion. A cup of thin ale appears in his hand, placed there by the young boy who now clings to his sleeve. The tangle of nets and dreams, the first glow of dawn touches the hut like a cautious fingertip on old linen. Inside, you hear the low breathing of sleep, woven with the occasional sigh or gentle snore. The hearth has burned down to a nest of glowing embers, pulsing softly like a hidden heart. Bjorn stirs first. His breath forms pale clouds in the chill air as he sits upright, his long hair falling in tangled knots over his shoulders. Slowly, he reaches for the thick wool cloak folded beside his sleeping place. As he drapes it over himself, the cloth settles like a wave folding over a quiet beach in the dimness. Bjorn's eyes roam the hut, the bundle of dried kelp in the corner, the small pile of fish bones waiting to be burned for ash, the delicate twist of fishskin cords hanging from the rafters. These are the humble markers of his life, each one a silent testament to countless hours spent fighting the cold and the sea's hunger. He stands and moves to the hearth, gently stirring the embers. Sparks leap like startled insects before fading into the grey. Carefully, he adds slender twigs, coaxing a new flame from the sleeping coals. The fire answers slowly, each crackle a sleepy greeting. Soon, the women begin to wake. The old woman, with hair like kelp strands, rises from her mat, her joints creaking like the ribs of a weather-beaten boat. She shuffles to the hearth, warming. her hands and muttering a low chant, part prayer, part old habit. You sense that her words hold no particular urgency, only a gentle request for the day to unfold kindly. The young girl with honey hair rubs her eyes and untangles her braids. She steps outside to fetch a bucket of seawater, each step echoing across the stones like a soft drumbeat. As she lifts the heavy bucket, the muscles in her thin arms flex with quiet determination. The boy, still half lost in dream, pulls a wool tunic over his head. He yawns so widely you can almost hear the sea rush inside him, as though he carries its hush in his lungs. Outside, the fish racks stand solemn in the early light. Rows of pale, dangling bodies sway faintly in the breeze, like the pages of an ancient book left open to the wind. Each fish has its own story, caught in a sudden storm, tugged from the depths by silent hooks, sliced open by practiced hands, and now given to the salt and the sky. Bjorn steps out to inspect them. His fingers move gently from fish to fish, checking for ice crystals, tightening knots. His breath curls around his face, merging with the sea mist that rolls across the shore in the far distance. Waves break against hidden rocks, sending up veils of spray that catch the morning sun in quicksilver bursts. Today is for mending nets, an endless task, yet crucial. The nets hang inside a small shed built from driftwood and whalebone. You slip inside behind Bjorn and find it lined with coils of rope, wooden floats, and bundles of sealskin patches. The scent here is strong: salt, old fish oil, and the smoky sweetness of kelp. Bjorn sits on a low stool, pulling a net into his lap. Each knot is a question to be answered, each tear a small confession. With a bone needle and a length of twisted cord, he works slowly, threading and tightening with the patience of a monk illuminating a manuscript. The old woman joins him, settling across from him with her own tangle of nets. Her fingers are slower, but their memory is older. Each knot she ties seems to echo the knots tied by mothers and grandmothers before her, an invisible lineage woven into every loop. Between them there is little speech, a small grunt when a knot slips, a faint sigh when a thread breaks, and otherwise only the hush of concentrated breath and the faint clack of bone needles against driftwood. Meanwhile, the young girl returns with seawater and starts cleaning fish heads. Her knife glides under gill flaps, slicing off small bits of flesh to be dried separately or used for broth. The motion is rhythmic: slice, twist, scrape. You watch her face soften as she settles into the quiet pleasure of repetition. The boy drags a coil of rope from the corner, his hands blackened by salt and fish slime. He sits on the threshold, untangling the strands slowly. His tongue pokes from the corner of his mouth, each loop and kink a puzzle that absorbs him entirely. At midday, they pause. The girl heats a pot of thin broth with bits of kelp and dried mussels. The scent floats through the shed, mixing with the salt-heavy air. The old woman offers Bjorn a small wooden cup. He accepts it without looking up, his eyes still following the path of his needle. A few words pass between them, sparse, careful, more like gestures than true sentences. You catch fragments: wind turning, good salt, net strong enough for spring cod. After the meal, they return to their nets. Outside, gulls wheel and shriek, scolding the world for its secrets. The wind shifts slightly, bringing the smell of distant storms. You see Bjorn pause, eyes lifting to the door, sensing something just beyond the horizon. Then he returns to his knot. The afternoon light grows pale and thin, draping itself over the racks and boats like an old blanket. Children's laughter rings briefly from the far rocks, then fades again into the hushed dot inside the shed. The old woman's fingers move more slowly now. You see her rub her knuckles, exhale through tight lips. Each joint seems to carry the memory of 100 winters, each tendon whispering of storms survived and long hours spent mending nets by flickering lamps. Bjorn finishes a section and sets the net aside. He leans back, closes his eyes, and you sense a small world opening inside him. The smell of salt spray in summer gales, the dark blue weight of the sea in moonlight, the soft thud of fish against a boat hull at dawn. The young boy curls beside him, head resting on Bjorn's thigh. A hand slides into the boy's hair, gently, absent-mindedly, as though to keep him from drifting too far into sleep or dream. Later, as twilight begins its slow descent, they carry the finished net to the shore. Bjorn stretches each one between 2 weathered posts, checking for tension and stray holes. The nets gleam faintly, tiny droplets catching the fading light like stars on a dark tapestry. The old woman stands back, hands on her hips, her eyes scanning each loop and knot. She nods, satisfied. You see the flicker of pride, not loud or boastful, but deep and old, like a warm stone hidden in snow. The young girl hangs fish heads on small lines strung near the fire pit. Each head will dry slowly, turning from slick and red to pale and tough as bark. Nothing is wasted here. Every scale and scrap holds value in this thin edge between survival and hunger. A few neighbors appear in the distance, moving like slow ghosts across the stones. They carry small baskets of sea urchins and bladderwrack, trade offerings for a share of dried fish or spare netting. Bjorn greets them with quiet nods. Hands move to pouches, simple exchanges of goods and glances. No coins, no loud bargaining. Only the hush of mutual need and patient respect. The sea listens, whispering softly at the margin of rock and foam. As darkness drapes itself across the sky, torches are lit. Small flames flicker beside the fish racks, turning the hanging bodies into a forest of long shadows. The wind carries the smell of smoke and seaweed, a scent that clings to hair, skin, and wool forever. The family gathers by the hearth inside. The girl stitches a small fishskin pouch for her comb and beads, her fingers moving in quick, nimble flicks. The old woman slides her bone needle through a final repair on a mitten, then lays it aside with a sigh. Bjorn sharpens a knife on a stone, the slow rasp echoing like a distant wave, pulling stones along the shore. The boy watches, eyes wide, each pass of steel against stone, leaving an imprint on his young mind. A bowl of warm broth passes around. Each sip is measured, each swallow slow and mindful. Here, even food moves like the sea, rhythmic, cyclical, never hurried. When the bowl returns to the center, the old woman begins a soft chant. Her voice is rough as wind, but carries a lulling cadence that draws each listener inward. The words tell of giant fish that guard the deep, of sea spirits who knot storms into fishermen's nets, of ancestors whose souls drift among the kelp beds at dawn. The children lean closer, eyes flickering with that half-light between belief and dream. Bjorn's head dips, the knife now idle in his hand. The girl stitches slow, her eyelids drooping dot outside. The fish racks creak gently under the moon, each movement a small prayer to the gods of wind and salt. The torches sputter and bow to the breeze, their flames bowing low before springing. Upright again as the chant winds down, silence folds over the hut. The old woman sits back, her eyes closed, her breath shallow and even. The girl lays her pouch aside and curls into a ball, head tucked into her elbow. Bjorn rouses slightly, stirs the embers, and sets another piece of driftwood atop the coals. The glow blooms anew, softening the edges of the hut and wrapping each figure in gentle warmth. The boy, now nearly asleep, slides to the floor and pulls a small fur over his shoulders. His lips part slightly, a tiny sigh escaping as he drifts toward dreams. Bjorn sets the knife aside and stands, moving to the door. He looks out at the moonlit racks, at the ghostly nets shining in dew, at the ever-shifting mirror of the sea. You stand beside him, feeling the salt wind on your face, hearing the distant hush of waves against rock. A gull calls once, sharp and quick, then vanishes into the dark. Bjorn's breath is long and slow, his shoulders rising and falling like the swells far beyond the shoals. You sense the weight of all his seasons here, the storms, the lean harvests, the mornings when the sea yielded nothing but heartbreak, where the waves whisper the hush of pre-dawn is almost holy here. You feel it seep through the sod walls, settling in the fur blankets and curling into the strands of long, salt-crusted hair. The world seems to hold its breath between the last stars blink and the first stir of human hands. Bjorn rises before the faintest grey smudges the horizon. His breath blooms in the cold air like pale ghost flowers. He rolls his shoulders, heavy with the memory of nets and 1,000 small tasks that tether life to this edge of the world. In the corner, the old woman is already awake. She presses her palms together over her knees, her back curved like a bow long held in tension. She whispers a thin thread of prayer, her words slipping into the air like driftwood on a receding tide. Bjorn steps out into the dark, the door creaking gently behind him. The sand is frozen firm beneath his boots. Overhead, the last stars tremble and slowly fade. As though reluctant to abandon this rugged coastline, he heads to the racks first. Rows upon rows of fish hang in quiet rows, each body stiff and pale, heads bowed as if listening to the sea's ancient secrets. Bjorn inspects them, fingers tracing along salted edges, noting the crackling firmness that means they are nearly ready. You feel the sea breeze slip past your cheeks, cold as a blade, but carrying something almost sweet, a promise of another day, another chance to match the ocean's relentless rhythm beyond the racks. A small inlet cradles the family's boat, its curved hull rocking slightly with each quiet lap of water. Bjorn moves toward it, running a hand along the gunwale, testing each seam. He checks the oars, each one smoothed and darkened by years of salt and fingers. As he works, you hear the low shuffle of others stirring. The old woman emerges next, her breath puffing around her face like fog rising off a midnight lake. She carries a small wooden bowl of dried fish skins, gnawed thin and translucent from hours over the smoke pit. She lays them on a low stone, weighing them down with a flat rock so they don't blow away on a sudden gust. The young girl and the boy come after, bleary-eyed hair mussed like wind-ruffled kelp. The girl ties her honey-coloured hair with a fish-skin thong, her fingers deft even while half asleep. The boy carries an empty basket nearly his size, his small arms wrapped around it like a protective shell. Together, they move to the tide pools while Bjorn inspects the boat. You follow them across the rocks, feeling the grit under your feet, smelling the mingled tang of salt, seaweed, and the faint metallic scent of new morning dot at the pools. They kneel and peer into the still water. Crabs scuttle sideways, sea snails cling to the stones, and tiny fish dart in sudden silver flashes. The girl plunges her hand beneath a kelp frond and draws out a fat sea urchin, its spines twitching slightly as though in quiet protest. She shows it to the boy, who stares, wide-eyed. They exchange a hushed giggle, the sound floating up like gull cries into the dawn air. She tucks it into the basket carefully, whispering a small apology to the creature, a custom taught to all children here. Nothing taken from the sea is taken without gratitude. As the light grows, the world changes shape. The rocks begin to glow in subtle hues of lavender and grey. A slow-motion ballet of gulls unfolds above the waves, each bird's cry threading the sky like fine white stitches. You glance back at Bjorn. He has moved from the boat to the nets laid along the shore. He squats, inspecting each knot, the lines of his spine echoing the long curves of the fjord behind him. With each tug and glance, he seems to weave his spirit into the net, binding not just rope, but the very heartbeat of his family to the sea's whims. The old woman now kneels beside a stone hearth outside the hut. She lights a small kelp fire, the smoke drifting slowly, softly into the waking air. Over it, she places a small iron pot, filled with yesterday's broth and new slices of fish belly. She hums an old lullaby as she stirs a song older than any recorded saga, older perhaps than even the written word in this place. The melody is slow, curling like mist across the water inside the hut. The girl and boy return, basket heavy with urchins, small crabs, and sea snails. They lay out their treasures on a driftwood board. The girl uses a bone, all to crack the urchins, extracting the soft orange roe, while the boy lines up snails to coax from their shells. Each movement is small, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Bjorn returns and ducks inside, bringing the cold smell of dawn with him. He sets a few stray fish bones on the central hearth, an offering to the household spirits. The old woman nods in approval without pausing her song. The morning meal is simple, a thin broth with fish roe, a handful of kelp, and stray bits of shellfish. They each take a small clay bowl and squat close to the fire. The steam rises in lazy spirals, and each person eats with silent reverence. Between sips, Bjorn glances at the children, his eyes softening despite the salt-seared lines at their corners. The girl shyly offers him a piece of urchin roe, which he accepts with a quiet grunt of gratitude. The boy mimics him, trying to adopt the same stoic expression, but his lips curl into a tiny, uncontrollable grin. Bjorn ruffles his hair, a rare gesture that ripples like warmth through the small circle. After the meal, the tasks resume. The girl carries a basket of dried fish heads toward the racks, where she will thread them onto lines for additional curing. The boy, under the old woman's watchful eye, begins weaving small fish-skin cords for pouch straps, his small fingers fumbling at first, but gaining steadiness with each loop. Bjorn heads to the boat again. Today, he plans to fish further offshore. He checks the knots on the oarlocks, tests the coil of line, and counts the iron hooks. Each motion is measured and slow, as if even time here moves to the rhythm of the sea. You watch as he pushes the boat gently into the inlet. He climbs in, balancing with practiced ease, and begins rowing past the rocks where the water deepens into dark green mysteries. The old woman watches from the shore, her hands folded inside her sleeves. Her gaze does not waver, following Bjorn, until the boat is a small dark smudge against the shimmering horizon. In his absence, the shore becomes a quiet hive. The girl sings softly as she works, her voice rising and falling like a small wave. The boy repeats her words under his breath. learning by echo and rhythm rather than deliberate teaching. The old woman hums another tune as she plucks small barnacles from a piece of driftwood, saving them to dry for grinding into powder, a remedy for winter coughs, or an offering for good luck before a storm. When Bjorn returns, the boat is heavy with fish. Cod and lynx spill from the woven baskets, their eyes glassy, mouths parted as though gasping final secrets. The girl and boy run to help, their hands reaching eagerly for the baskets despite the weight. Bjorn lifts a large cod and holds it aloft, its pale belly flashing in the afternoon light. The boy gasps, and Bjorn gives him a small, quick nod, a wordless blessing, a subtle rite of passage. Together they carry the fish to the salting troughs. The girl sprinkles coarse sea salt with the solemnity of a priestess anointing a sacred altar. Bjorn slices each fish with deliberate care, the blade's edge whispering along the bone. Hours pass in this unhurried litany of survival. Slice, salt, stack, repeat. All around them, the sea breathes and sighs, its voice sometimes gentle, sometimes deep and resonant, as though sharing stories with the wind. The sun now lowers toward the sea, staining the water with ribbons of gold and grey. The fish racks glow in this light, turning the hanging bodies into pale lanterns, swaying softly in the breeze. Bjorn stands for a moment at the water's edge. His arms hang at his sides, hands still crusted with salt and fish scales. He looks out across the widening shadows, his breath falling into the ocean's endless hush. The children play by the rocks again, skipping flat stones across the water's skin. Each skip marks a brief heartbeat in the long pulse of twilight. The girl's laughter peals out, then softens, merging into the evening mist inside. The old woman prepares the final meal of the day, a thin porridge from barley and fish broth. She sprinkles dried kelp on top, turning each bowl into a small privet ocean. They eat slowly, savoring each mouthful as though it holds the warmth of summer sun or the kindness of a calm sea. Afterward, they sit together, knees drawn up, each person's silhouette outlined by the dim glow of the hearth. Bjorn leans back, his head tipping against the wall. The boy rests against his chest, small hands curled in sleep's quiet grasp. The girl reclines nearby, her eyes half closed, her breath deep and slow. The old woman begins her final chant of the day. Her voice wavers, but holds steady, like a candle flame caught in a soft breeze. She sings of ancestors who walk beneath the sea, of nets that shimmer with moonlight, of fish that speak to dreamers on starless nights. Bjorn listens, his eyes distant, as though tracing the lines of nets drifting far below the waves. You see his shoulders soften, his jaw unclench, small releases barely visible, but felt like deep tides beneath still water. Outside, the gulls quiet their cries, settling into rocky crevices. The racks creak softly as fish sway in the rising night breeze. The moon lifts its pale face above the horizon, casting a long silver ladder across the sea. The hut breathes as one, a small, fragile ship adrift in a world of dark water and endless stars. Each soul inside glows faintly, held together by nets of shared labor, of salted hands, of simple meals and hushed stories. As the final note of the chant fades, the old woman bows her head. Story 3. The secret sleep of Bronze Age weavers looms beneath the moonand now. Let's drift into a new corner of forgotten history. Close your eyes and imagine a soft blanket of darkness settling over a valley. A river winds through the land like a silver ribbon, shimmering under the moonlight. You feel the hush of a world without electricity, without the hum of machines, without the chatter of distant traffic. Instead, you hear the river's sigh, the hush of reeds swaying along its banks, and the distant, rhythmic clack of wooden looms. In a longhouse lit by embers, we find ourselves in a bronze age settlement tucked in a small clearing surrounded by thick oak and hazel woods. The settlement is simple but purposeful, oval-shaped huts with steep thatched roofs to shed the rain, earthen floors packed hard by decades of feet, and doorways low enough that you must stoop to enter. Tonight, the moon is high and full, casting pale light across the woven fences and piles of firewood stacked like sleepy sentinels. Smoke drifts gently from small vents in the roof, carrying with it the smell of peat fires and boiled nettle broth. Inside the main longhouse, a group of women sit cross-legged around large vertical looms. The looms are rough but elegant, long, poles set into the packed earth, horizontal beams lashed with twisted gut cord, and heavy loom weights made of smooth stones dangling like patient bells. You see a woman named Asa, her hair a dark braid resting between her shoulders like a quiet river. Her hands move steadily, sliding the shuttle through the warp threads, pulling the weft tight, then beating it down with a smooth wooden sword. The movements are deliberate, repeated so many times that they live inside her fingers even when she sleeps. Beside her sits Brynhild, older, her hair streaked with grey and gathered in a tight bun. Her eyes are small and sharp as sparrow points, missing nothing in the half-lit room. She hums an old weaving song, a gentle, repetitive chant, designed not to entertain, but to quiet the mind and keep the rhythm steady. Further down, young Yrsa leans forward on her knees, struggling to keep her shuttle from slipping. Her fingers fumble, and she sighs, cheeks flushed in the glow of the low hearth. Brynhild notices and murmurs a line of the song a little louder, helping the girl find the cadence again. The room is a tapestry in itself, threads of shadow and ember glow, hands weaving not just wool, but stories, prayers, dreams. In one corner, small baskets overflow with raw fleece, carded and twisted into rough hanks ready to be spun. In another, pots of ochre and madder root wait for the morning, when the cloth will be dipped and transformed into soft reds and earthy yellows. Outside, the air is heavy with the scent of damp moss and wood smoke. The river keeps its patient watch, gurgling softly under the moon's quiet gaze. A fox moves along the edge of the clearing, pausing to sniff the wind before slipping silently between the hazel trees. Inside, Asa pauses to stretch her back, arching her shoulders toward the roof beams. You hear her vertebrae crack faintly, like small twigs underfoot. She glances at the doorway, where a small clay lamp flickers, casting a trembling pool of gold onto the dirt floor. A child, no more than for winters old, sleeps curled on a fur. Near the hearth, his hair is a pale tangle, his thumb resting in his mouth, cheeks flushed with warmth. Each exhale is a small, soft note in the hush of the longhouse. Brynhild stands and moves to check the pot bubbling over the fire. Inside, a thin stew of wild greens and barley murmurs to itself, sending up small, ghostly tendrils of steam. She stirs it carefully, humming her song, then ladles a little into a wooden bowl set aside for the morning meal. Asa shifts her loom, waits slightly, adjusting the tension in her warp threads. Each weight is a rounded stone, smoothed over years in the river, each carrying its own story of currents and collisions. She runs her thumb across one, feeling the grooves carved by water and time. The room smells of wool, peat, smoke, and a faint, hint of wild onion. You watch as Asa dips her fingers in a small pot of tallow, rubbing it gently into the threads to soften them. Her movements slow, as though the world outside time has crept into her bones. The girl, Erisa, finds her pace again. Her shuttle slides back and forth like a small boat across a narrow channel, the rhythm calming her breath. She mouths Brynhild's song silently, her eyes half closed, weaving not just cloth, but a private dream world. The older women do not correct her mistakes tonight. There will be time in the morning to unpick crooked lines. For now, the gentle quiet of the moonlit hour is more valuable than any perfection. Beyond the door, a soft breeze stirs the tree branches, carrying the sound of distant night birds calling to each other. An owl glides low over the clearing, its wings silent as moonbeams. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a stag shifts, snorting softly into the cold dark. Isa's husband returns from the edge of the forest, where he has checked snares set along the game trails. He carries a small bundle to rabbits and a handful of wild mushrooms tied together with a strip of bark. He kneels just inside the doorway, careful not to disturb the weaver's fragile calm. Asa smiles faintly, but does not stop her hands. The shuttle moves, as though guided by another mind, her fingers now almost ghost-like in their delicacy. Her husband lays the bundle beside the hearth and takes a seat on a low stool, pulling a small knife from his belt to begin dressing the rabbits. The child stirs, rolling toward the warmth of the fire, mumbling in half-speech that only the very young and very old seem to understand. Brynhild chuckles softly, her voice low and kind, and adjusts the fur over his shoulders. Near the door, a wooden chest holds small treasures, a spindle carved with swirling patterns, tiny beads of amber and bone, scraps of brightly dyed wool from previous seasons. These tokens are not just adornments, but carry stories of trades with distant settlements, of long summer journeys to marshlands and lakes, of hopes stitched into tunics and shawls. Asa glances toward the chest now and then, her eyes reflecting the faint lamplight. You sense that each woven thread tonight is connected to those old beads and bright scraps. Threads looping back through generations of hands and hearts. Hours pass in this quiet ceremony. The moon climbs higher, and the hush deepens into something almost sacred. Brynhild's song fades to a hum, then dissolves completely, leaving only the small clicks and rustles of weaving. Asa ties off her last section for the night, and leans her forehead against the loom beam, breathing slowly, deeply, as though drawing strength from the wood itself. Yrsa sets her shuttle down gently, flexing her fingers as if releasing tiny invisible birds. Brynhild pours a little water from a clay jug into her palm and splashes her face, the droplets catching the lamplight like shards of tiny stars. She straightens her back, nods once, and begins covering the raw wool with a rough linen cloth to keep the morning dew from settling into it. The husband sets aside his cleaned rabbits and mushrooms, wrapping them in leaves to hang overnight beyond the reach of foxes. His knife clinks softly as he sets it into a small clay pot near the hearth. The final tasks drift into completion like the last notes of a lullaby. Asa adjusts the fur on her sleeping child, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Checks the loom weights once more, ensuring none will slip or strain the precious warp overnight. Yrsa curls beside the hearth, her head resting on a small pillow stuffed with straw and dried heather. The lamplight dims, the shadows stretch and breathe, and the moon stands watch beyond the low doorway, You feel the slow, deep rhythm of the longhouse, the collective exhale of humans and loom weights and hearth embers alike. In this moment, the room is a great woven net, holding the weavers, their dreams, and the sleeping child in a single, gentle embrace. Somewhere outside, the river continues its endless, patient journey toward the sea, whispering secrets into the roots of reeds and the ears of stones. Tonight, as you listen to these quiet breaths and feel the warmth of the last embers, you might ask yourself, what hidden patterns drift through our own dreams, weaving us together beneath the pale light of a silent moon. Threads of dawn, the first breath of dawn slides over the valley like a pale veil, slipping between the trees and over the sleeping thatch roofs. The air is cold and damp, fragrant with moss and dew, and you feel it settle across your skin like the gentle touch of an old friend. Inside the longhouse, the embers have died down to a nest of glowing bones. They pulse softly, echoing the slow rise and fall of sleeping breaths. The loom weights sway faintly, as if they too are stirring from a long, dreamful slumber. Asa is the first to move. Her fingers twitch before her eyelids open, as if even in sleep she is weaving. When her eyes do flutter open, they are slow and heavy, like a pond thawing at the edge of spring. She lies still for a moment, listening to the soft chorus of the morning, the muffled river beyond the walls, the sigh of wind combing through the hazel trees, the muted rustle of small feet in the thatch above as mice begin their day. Slowly she rises, wrapping a wool shawl around her shoulders. The shawl is rough and carries the smell of last night's smoke and years of fires before that. She moves to the hearth and coaxes a flame from the ashes, feeding it twigs and curls of birch bark. The fire stretches upward, shivering into orange. Life Brynhild is next. She groans as she sits up, her joints cracking in the stillness. She rubs her wrists, each lined with pale scars and the faint imprint of decades at the loom. There is no rush in her movements. Each gesture unfolds at its own patient pace. Near the hearth, the child stirs and rolls toward the warmth. His tiny hand searches for a familiar shape, finds Isa's ankle, and clings there for a moment before sliding back into sleep. Outside, a thin mist drapes itself across the clearing. You can see the first hint of sun turning the edges of the mist to a faint, liquid gold. The smell of wet earth rises up, rich and almost sweet. Brynhild moves to the covered baskets and lifts the linen cloth from the raw wool. She runs her hands across the fluffy mass, lifting tufts and pulling gently, separating strands and breathing deeply of their lanolin scent. This wool is from a small flock of hardy sheep, their coats rough and wild from roaming near the forest edges. Yrsa wakes. Slowly, she stretches her arms high above her head, mouth open in a silent yawn, her hair a wild tangle across her shoulders. She shivers and pulls her thin tunic tighter, shuffling toward the fire like a moth to a lantern. Asa begins grinding dried nettle seeds in a small stone bowl, preparing to mix them into a morning gruel. The grinding stone hums with each circle, its music so soft it seems more like a breath than a sound. Yrsa sits across from her, watching, half mesmerized. Brynhild kneels at the loom, checking each warp thread. She hums to herself again, not quite a song, more a rhythmic murmur that seems to echo the slow spin of the earth itself. She pulls the shuttle through the threads once, twice, as though testing the morning air. Outside, the husband emerges from a small lean-to near the edge of the trees. He carries a handful of dry sticks and a rough leather sling with 2 river fish, their scales still shining faintly. He kneels by a separate outdoor hearth, arranging the sticks with care. Asa pours water into a clay pot, setting it on the indoor hearth. Steam begins to rise almost immediately, curling around her face and slipping into her hair. Asa brings her a small fistful of wild onion greens, gathered at the riverbank last moon. Asa takes them with a nod, slicing them thin with a flint blade that glints in the fireht. As the pot bubbles, Brynhild beckons Yrsa to the loom. Yrsa hesitates, then stands, wiping her hands on her tunic. Brynhild steps aside, placing her weathered hands over Yrsa's slender wrists, guiding them into position. The warp threads tremble as her fingers move, and you can see her cheeks flush with the closeness of this shared moment. Brynhild's voice lowers into a soft, patient instruction. Each word is like a drop of water on stone, shaping and smoothing. With gentle repetition, Yrsa breathes deeply, her eyes focused on the path of the shuttle. With each pass, her shoulders straighten, her breath steadies. The loom begins to speak in its quiet, clicking language, a shared conversation between generations. Asa spoons out the warm gruel into clay bowls, adding the onion greens and a pinch of salt. She calls softly, and Brynhild guides Yrsa away from the loom. They gather around the hearth, cradling the bowls carefully. They eat in a hush. The only sounds, the clink of spoons and the occasional contented sigh. The child finally wakes fully, rubbing his eyes with small fists and leaning into Isa's side. She feeds him slow spoonfuls, each one a small ceremony of care. Outside, the sun climbs higher, illuminating the patterns of woven fences and the spiral shell beads strung near the doorway. Birds flit from branch to branch, shaking the last drops of mist from the leaves. After the meal, the rhythm of work resumes. Asa tends to the spinning. She sits on a low stool, drawing out long, thin fibers from a roving of carded wool. The spindle in her hand whirls in a slow dance, twisting the fibers into thread. With each turn, her breath seems to sync with the movement, as though she is winding part of her own spirit into the yarn. YRSA returns to the loom, her face set in quiet determination. Brynhild hovers nearby, her presence as firm and calm as an oak tree. Now and then, she points to a warp thread or guides Iris's fingers with the lightest of touches. The child plays near the hearth, stacking smooth stones into small towers. Each clatter of falling stones echoes briefly before being absorbed into the loom's gentle chorus. In the far corner, Isa's husband carves small fish hooks from bone scraps left over from last summer's hunts. His knife moves with a slow, circular motion, each shaving of bone falling like curled snowflakes onto a hide spread across his knees. By midday, the air in the longhouse is thick with warmth and the temps of wool grease. The door is propped open to invite the breeze, and shafts of sun carve delicate paths across the dirt floor, highlighting stray bits of fiber floating in the air. Brynhild steps outside for a moment, stretching her back and lifting her face to the sky. Her hair glows silver in the light, each strand a quiet testimony 2 years spent under sun and moon. Yrsa pauses, watching Brynhild. You see a yearning in her eyes, a desire to one day bear the same marks of devotion to the loom, to be as deeply woven into this place as the elder woman. Asa stands and brings a clay jug of cool water, offering it first to Yrsa, then to Brynhild. As she returns inside, the water is earthy and clear, drawn from a spring beyond the river bend, kept cold in the cool shadows beneath oak roots. They drink slowly, savoring each swallow as if it contains a small blessing. The child giggles, dipping his fingers into Issa's jug and flicking droplets across the floor. Issa's lips curl into a patient smile. She gently pulls him close, resting her chin on his hair for a moment before returning to her spinning. The day passes in soft pulses, the hum of the loom, the sigh of the spindle, the small exclamations of the child at play. The husband hangs, fish to dry near the door, their bodies glinting briefly like pale ghosts before turning still dot in the afternoon. Brynhild examines the woven cloth on the loom. She runs her palms across it, feeling the density and evenness, nodding approvingly. She whispers to Yrsa, who looks up and beams shyly, her teeth flashing in the dimness. Asa rolls her finished thread into a tight ball, smoothing each layer. Carefully, she sets it beside a growing pile, pale grey, ochre-dyed, and some streaked with deep earthy reds from madder root. Each ball is a future promise, a tunic, a belt, a blanket to wrap a newborn next winter. As the sun begins its slow descent, they tidy the longhouse. The spindle and distaff are tucked into the corner, the stray tufts of wool swept gently into a basket for later stuffing. Brynhild covers the unfinished cloth with a woven mat to keep the evening dampness at bay. Asa prepares the evening meal, a broth with foraged greens, barley, and slivers of dried fish. The smell rises like a soft hand, curling through the beams and drifting outside into the amber light. The child helps by bringing small handfuls of herbs and stirring with a carved spoon that is nearly as long as his arm. Each motion is clumsy, but earnest, and his small frowns of concentration make Asa chuckle quietly. Brynhild braids her hair, her fingers working without thought, each twist a memory of sunrises and quiet nights before the loom. Yrsa sits beside her, imitating each motion, her own braid uneven and stray hairs escaping in small tufts. Brynhild leans over to tuck them back, her touch gentle, her expression soft with pride. The husband returns with a handful of mushrooms and wild onions from the edge of the woods. Asa adds them to the pot, the broth thickening as it bubbles. They eat together as dusk settles, their silhouettes framed by the glow of the hearth. The meal is slow and measured, each spoonful an offering to the shared quiet. Afterward, they sit by the fire, wrapped in wool cloaks, their eyes heavy but peaceful. Brynhild hums a closing song, her voice lower and slower than in the morning, a twilight lullaby for the loom, the land, and the souls within the longhouse. Yrsa leans, against her eyelids drooping, her breathing slowing to match the song's gentle cadence. Asa gathers the child into her lap, rocking slightly as he drifts towards sleep, his small fingers curling into her tunic outside. The moon rises again, a pale lantern above the still woods. The river carries the day's last whispers out to sea, gliding past roots and reeds with infinite patience. Dreams in the weft night folds itself once more across the valley, laying a velvet hush over the trees and riverbanks. You sense it settling into the thatch roofs and mossy stones, sliding into each small crevice like a tide returning to a moonlit shore. Inside the longhouse, embers glow with a patient, watchful warmth. A few thin tendrils of smoke curl upward, disappearing into the dark beams above. The breath of sleeping bodies drifts in gentle rhythm, as though echoing the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath them. Asa wakes first again, her eyes opening as if summoned by some secret chord plucked beneath the soil. She lies still for a moment, listening not just to the sounds within the house, but to the quiet outside, the faint rustle of a fox moving through bracken, the low murmur of the river's endless journey, Tonight is different. Tonight they will finish a great length of cloth, a weaving begun many moons ago. It is meant for a cloak, one that will drape over a chieftain's shoulders in winter or ride across distant hills on the back of a traveling trader. Every thread has been pulled, twisted, and tightened beneath careful fingers. Every color chosen to mirror earth and sky and firelight. Asa rises silently and moves toward the loom. She runs her hand over the taut warp threads, feeling each slight tension, each hidden story waiting to be released. The moonlight falls across her wrist, revealing faint scars and a fine lattice of lines that map a life of repetitive, loving labor. Brynhild stirs and shifts under her wool cloak. Her hair has come loose from its braid, forming a silvery halo around her head. She rubs her eyes slowly, her knuckles pressing into the soft creases of her temples. When she sees Asa at the loom, she smiles, a small knowing curve of her. Lips that feels older than the moon itself. Yrsa lies curled near the hearth, her breath puffing softly against the edge of a fur blanket. The child is still in his small pile of furs, thumb tucked securely in his mouth. A small island of warmth and innocence amidst the quiet labors of the night. Asa begins to work, her shuttle sliding through the warp, the weft building slowly. With each pass, Brynhild joins her after a while, standing close behind, her fingers lightly touching Isa's shoulder when the rhythm falters. Together they move in silence, each pass of the shuttle a quiet offering to the darkness beyond the walls. The sound of weaving at night is different, softer, more intimate. The loom's gentle clicks and the hush of thread slipping through thread feel almost like a lullaby to the stars above. You can imagine those stars listening, leaning closer to hear each soft beat. Outside, the moon sails high. Its pale light pools around the doorframe, spills across the dirt floor, and dances briefly on the loom weights hanging like silent bells. You can almost see them sway slightly, as if they too were dreaming. Isa's husband wakes and moves to the door, looking out across the moonlit clearing. He stretches, joints creaking, then kneels to check the drying fish hanging on a wooden frame. The cool night air settles into his bones, but he smiles faintly at the sight of the shimmering scales. He returns inside and crouches near the hearth, stirring the embers back to a gentle glow. From a small clay pot, he takes a bit of fat and tosses it onto the coals. The scent of burning tallow rises, earthy and comforting, drifting through the room like an old memory. Yrsa stirs at the smell, blinking slowly. She sits up, rubbing her eyes, and watches the women at the loom. She seems to hover at the edge of a dream, her mind still half in the land of stars and river songs. Slowly, she moves to sit beside them, knees tucked under her chin, eyes following each pass of the shuttle as though watching a dance. Brynhild looks down at her and smiles, extending a hand. Yrsa takes it, small fingers curling around the elders, knotted, warm palm. Together, they guide the shuttle through again and again, the cloth growing longer, heavier, more complete with each breath. The husband prepares a simple drink of hot water and crushed dried berries. He hands each woman a steaming clay cup. They sip carefully, the warmth sliding into their chests, loosening the tightness from long hours at the loom. Yrsa cradles her cup with both hands, inhaling the sharp sweetness that reminds her of summer days gathering berries under the sun. Time seems to slow even further now, each moment stretched like soft wool pulled into thin roving. The longhouse becomes a world unto itself, a small woven universe of shadows, warmth, and moonlit threads. They reach the final length of weaving, just before dawn's first pale smudge appears in the eastern sky. Brynhild stands, lifting her hands above the loom, and utters a few words in a low, rhythmic chant, an old prayer, older than the oldest memories, asking the spirits of the loom and the ancestors to bless this cloth on its journey. Isa's eyes shimmer in the low light. Her fingers tighten briefly on the cloth, as though reluctant to let it leave her hands. Isa's small hand rests on the last edge of the weft, her breath caught in a quiet wonder. Together, they release the tension from the loom weights, untying knots and unwinding the last bindings. The cloth sags, then slips free into their arms. It is heavy, warm from their shared labor, and carries the scent of wool, smoke, and quiet devotion. They lay it carefully on a fur spread on the floor. Asa smooths it out with slow, sweeping gestures, as if calming a restless animal. Brynhild runs her fingers along the edges, checking for stray knots or loose ends. Her touch as tender as a mother's on a newborn's cheek. The child, now fully awake, crawls forward and lies across the cloth, giggling at its softness and warmth. Brynhild laughs a sound as round and bright as the moon's own laughter above. Asa smiles, leaning back on her heels, her shoulders dropping in relief. And satisfaction, the husband returns inside, his eyes widening in quiet admiration. He steps forward, touches the edge of the cloth, and bows his head slightly, offering silent respect for the hours, days, and moons woven into its fibers. Outside, the first birds begin to stir. Their tentative chirps weave into the hush, a new melody rising to greet the pale dawn. The moon lowers toward the western trees, slowly yielding the sky to the soft, growing light. Asa begins preparing a morning broth, using dried mushrooms, a bit of fish, and wild greens. Irisa helps her hands, quick and eager after the long night. Brynhild folds the finished cloth into a neat, careful bundle, binding it with a strip of dyed wool thread. They eat quietly, savoring each spoonful as if it holds the sweetness of new beginnings. The child leans against Asa, cheeks still pink. From the excitement, Brynhild watches them, eyes soft, as though seeing not just this moment, but echoes of countless mornings past and mornings yet to come. After the meal, they step outside together, carrying the bundled cloth. The air is fresh and carries the sweet, cold scent of damp earth and newly opened blossoms. They walk toward a small clearing where a wooden platform stands, a place to display an air-finished cloth, before final trading or use. They unroll the cloth onto the platform. It catches the early light, revealing subtle shifts of color and texture, streaks of pale gray, bands of warm ochre, and fine red lines like the paths of migrating birds across an autumn sky. Asa runs her hands over it once more, her eyes half closed, as though listening for a final whisper from the threads. Brynhild lifts her head to the sky, offering a soft prayer to the sun, the moon, and the river. All guardians of their weaving, Yrsa stands at the edge of the platform, gazing at the cloth with shining eyes. In her young face, you see both the future of this craft and the delicate vulnerability of one still learning to shape her own rhythm. The husband joins them, his hands resting on the wooden railing. Together, they stand in silence, breathing. In the dawn, the air seems to hold its own woven tapestry of scents and sounds. Birdsong stitched into the rustling of tree leaves, the hush of distant water sown into the breeze. After a while, they return to the longhouse. The loom stands empty now, a wooden skeleton waiting for the next length of wool to give it new life. Asa and Brynhild begin preparing the next warp threads, measuring and twisting, planning new patterns in quiet conversation. Asa gathers stray tufts of wool from the floor, placing them in a small basket to be spun later. The child, weary from the long vigil, lies down on a fur by the hearth. His eyes drift closed almost instantly, small hands curled beneath his cheek, a faint smile lingering on his lips, as though he dreams of moonlit cloth and gentle chants. Brynhild pauses to watch him sleep, her own breath slowing to match his. She moves to the loom, touches it lightly, then looks over her shoulder at Asa. There is no need for words between them. The shared language of thread and shuttle speaks louder than any voice. The rest of the day unfolds in slow waves, sorting dyed wool, checking stored supplies, mending cloaks and tunics. Small chores fill the hours with a gentle steadiness. Every so often, one of them steps outside to glance at the finished cloth on the platform, ensuring it remains safe from dew or stray animals. As dusk approaches, they gather inside again. A small fire crackles, its light painting shifting patterns. On the walls, Asa prepares a final meal, a thicker porridge this time, flavored with the last of the autumn honey and tiny dried berries. They eat together, shoulders touching, the silence around them as soft as the wool they spin. Afterward, Brynhild braids Asa's hair, fingers deft and unhurried. Asa smooths the child's blanket, humming low. Story 4, Salt, Silence, and the lanterns of the North Sea, the quiet harvest stand now. Let's drift into a different time, a different place. Close your eyes and imagine the grey light of a northern dawn, thin as old linen and touched by a pail. Hush, you find yourself on the wind-swept coast of what is now Denmark or the low-lying shores of Frisia. Long before the age of printed maps or wooden clocks, here the sea and sky blur into one endless breath. A salt marsh stretches before you, a vast, briny quilt stitched with channels and shallow pools. The air is sharp and damp, carrying the scent of kelp and distant storms. In the half-light, small groups of people move across the mud. Their figures appear as silhouettes, bent under baskets or dragging small sledges loaded with seaweed and driftwood. Among them is a woman named Freitas. Her hair is bound in a tight braid that falls between her shoulder blades, black as raven feathers in the morning gloom. She wears a thick woolen tunic dyed a muddy brown, the hem caked in salt and sea mud. Around her waist is a woven belt from which dangles a small bone knife, its handle smooth from years of use. Freitas bends to gather pieces of driftwood washed up during the night's high tide. Each piece is precious in this treeless landscape. Wood for fire, wood for repairs, wood for making pegs and handles. Her fingers work quickly despite the cold, moving with a rhythm learned from endless dawns, just like this one nearby. Her daughter Solveig works among the shallow pools. She uses a broad, flat scoop made from whalebone to lift layers of crystallized salt from the water's surface. The salt glitters faintly even in this dim light, like tiny shards of frost caught on the edges of a dream. Solveig piles the salt into a low basket, her shoulders trembling with the strain. A small boy, perhaps 5 or 6 winters old, crouches on a rock at the edge of a tidal creek. His name is Leaf, and he holds a length of kelp between his small hands, shaking it like a captured eel. He laughs softly, the sound drifting across the flats like a lost gull cry. Beyond them, several families move carefully, each group tending to their chosen patch of mudflat. Some rake for small shellfish or collect coarse sea salt, while others repair wooden fish traps embedded in the shallows. The work is silent except for the low murmur of the sea and the occasional call of a distant seabird. Phratis pauses to stretch her back, her gaze sweeping the horizon. Out there, beyond the shifting dunes and the mirror-flat pools, the North Sea breathes steadily, a living creature that has fed, frightened, and humbled these people for as long as memory allows. She thinks of her grandmother's stories, how the sea once swallowed entire villages in a single night, how it carried boats beyond sight and returned them years later as driftwood ghosts. In these stories, the sea was never merely water. It was a spirit, a mother and a monster both, singing in the dark. Solveig straightens and wipes her brow with the back of her sleeve, leaving a pale line of salt across her forehead. She lifts her basket carefully, shifting its weight against her hip. Each grain of salt is a small miracle. The summer sun, the cold moon, the patient tides, all captured and dried into crystals that will preserve fish and season thin gruels through the long, bitter winters. Phratis joins her, helping to adjust the basket straps. Their eyes meet, and for a moment, no words pass between them, only a shared breath, a quiet acknowledgement of the day's endless loop. A sudden gust of wind sweeps across the marsh, whipping at their hair and sending tiny droplets of brine against their cheeks. Leaf squeals in delight, throwing the kelp high into the air. It arcs and falls into a shallow pool with a soft splash, ripples shimmering outwards like a slow heartbeat. Phratis calls to him gently, her voice low and steady, like the murmur of peat smoke rising from a hearth. He scrambles to her side, his small boots squelching in the mud. She bends to wipe his hands clean with a scrap of worn linen tucked into her belt. Nearby, an older man tends to a series of woven reed traps arranged in a crooked line across a tidal channel. His name is Torsten, Phratis' uncle. His hair is white and coarse, braided in two tight cords that rest on his shoulders. He checks each trap slowly, lifting wriggling eels and small flatfish into a basket at his feet. Torsten moves like a creature carved from driftwood, slow, deliberate, every movement smoothed by decades of repetition. When a trap snags, he kneels into the icy water without hesitation, pushing his hand deep into the mud to free it. You watch as his breath clouds in the cold air, drifting upward to join the morning fog. Once his basket is full, he stands and shakes the water from his sleeves, his joints clicking softly like the settling of old hull timbers. He walks to Phratis and Solveig, nodding in greeting, his eyes bright beneath bushy brows. They exchange a few words in a dialect as rough and salty as the wind itself, words that carry more meaning in tone and glance than in shape. Phratis offers him a strip of dried fish from a pouch at her side. Torsten accepts it with a nod, chewing slowly as they watch the sea together. Solveig adjusts her basket again and begins to walk toward the higher ground, where the family's small sod hut stands. Its roof is low and blanketed in thick turf, blending almost seamlessly with the dunes. Smoke curls thinly from a narrow vent hole, the scent of last night's driftwood fire still clinging to the cold air. She moves slowly, each step careful, on the uneven, slippery ground. The salt crystals shift and click against each other in her basket. A quiet symphony of small successes. Leaf runs ahead, stopping now and then to scoop handfuls of sand and shells into the hood of his tunic. When he reaches the hut, he drops them in a small pile near the door, a growing collection of sea treasures that only he seems to value. Phratis and Torsten follow, dragging their sledges laden with driftwood and seaweed. The sledges leave pale, scars in the mud, like temporary paths that the next high tide will erase without a trace. At the hut, Selvig sets her basket on a flat stone near the door. She rubs her cold fingers together, blowing into her palms and sighing as the warmth slowly returns. Fretis drops her bundle of driftwood nearby, kneeling to sort through the pieces. Some will be set aside for carving, others dried further for fuel. Torsten empties his fish basket into a shallow wooden trough beside the door. The fish flop weakly, their final flickers of life marking the end of the sea's claim and the beginning of human hands' work. Fretis lights a small driftwood fire inside the hut, the smoke curling along the low ceiling before slipping out. The room brightens with a wavering glow that pushes back the cold shadows gathered in the corners. You feel the warmth slowly build, weaving itself into your own breath as you watch. Selvig sits by the fire, unwrapping a bundle of dry rushes she had gathered last season. She begins twisting them into small cords, her fingers moving methodically. Each cord will reinforce fish traps, tie bundles of herbs, or secure firewood stacks against the wind. Her fingers dance like small seabirds, skimming the waves, never quite still, never hurried. Leaf curls on a fur near the hearth, sucking his thumb and humming a tuneless lullaby only he knows. Fretis strokes his hair absently, her mind drifting beyond the walls, tracing the line of the dunes and the sea beyond. Torsten steps outside to clean the fish, crouched over a worn wooden board. His knife flashes dully in the morning light, each stroke slow and sure. Gulls gather nearby, watching with bright, greedy eyes, their calls sharp and echoing across the marsh. Inside, the hut smells of brine, smoke, and the soft sweetness of rush cords. The walls are lined with small bundles of dried herbs, hanging nets, and bone tools carefully arranged on hooks. Every object seems to hold a whispered story, a season's harvest, a winter's barter, a remembered storm as the morning deepens. Into a pale noon, Selvig finishes her cords and sets them aside. She steps outside, breathing deeply of the salt-heavy air. Her eyes follow the distant shimmer of the sea, the horizon trembling in the winter light. Torsten finishes cleaning the fish and sets them in a wide, shallow basket to dry. Fretis joins him, offering a strip of seaweed she has cleaned and softened. They eat together in silence, each bite an affirmation of the day's quiet victories. You watch them sitting there on the edge of the world, each breath woven into the cold wind, each glance a line in an unspoken poem older than any written word. The tide begins its slow return, creeping across the flats, swallowing the morning's footprints and reshaping the channels. The salt pools fill again, soft ripples chasing each other under the thin sun. Fretis stands, brushing salt and sand from her tunic. She begins gathering empty baskets and small tools, her movements as slow and deliberate as the tide. Helps, her young hands echoing her mother's rhythm, the silent inheritance of motion passing from one generation to the next. Torsten stacks driftwood against the side of the hut, arranging it to dry in the winter sun. Leaf drifts from pile to pile, his small fingers tracing shapes in the salt crusts, occasionally pausing to show a particularly pretty shell to anyone who will look. As the light begins to lean toward evening, the family prepares for another night. Fretis stirs a pot over the hearth, adding scraps of fish, handfuls of seaweed, and a pinch of precious salt. The smell is sharp and warming, a promise of warmth against the long, cold darkness. Selvig kneels to mend a net by the door, her fingers pulling and tying as the shadows deepen. The lanterns of the tides. The morning light filters softly through a thin veil of mist, casting muted silver across the endless expanse of salt marshes and tidal flats. The air carries the crisp scent of cold water, seaweed, and earth mingled in a timeless perfume. You step lightly onto the sodden ground, the soft mud giving just enough beneath your feet to remind you that the sea is never far away. Along the narrow, winding channels that crisscross the marsh, slender figures emerge. They carry lamps simple, wooden frames wrapped with translucent animal skins, the faint glow of fat lamps flickering within. These are the lanterns of the tides, delicate beacons that guide the harvesters through the half-light of dawn and dusk, when the sea's breath is most mysterious. Fratus moves steadily among them, her silhouette outlined by the lantern's gentle flame. Her hands are steady and sure, her gaze attentive to every ripple and shadow that might hide a promise or a peril. She is not alone in this early morning ritual. Families from scattered hamlets have gathered here, drawn by the same ancient rhythm, the same shared knowledge that the sea's gifts are best taken with care and respect. The lamps, light dancers on the water's surface, casting shifting patterns of gold and amber that mingle with the slow currents and the shimmer of salt crystals. It's as if the very soul of the sea has been captured in those fragile flames, each flicker a whispered story from the depths. Alongside Fratus, Solveig carries a small basket of freshly harvested salt crystals, their edges sharp and sparkling. She listens intently as her mother murmurs about the tides, about the secrets the water keeps. Each high tide brings new chances, but also new challenges, hidden pools where the mud is treacherous, sudden swells that can snatch a foot from beneath you, or swift currents that cloak the underwater traps. Leaf, curious and wide-eyed, walks carefully near the water's edge, clutching a lantern almost as big as himself. His small footsteps make faint impressions that the rising tide will soon erase, a quiet reminder of the fleeting nature of all things. As they move, the soft murmur of voices drifts over the marsh, voices low and rhythmic, weaving songs that seem as old as the land itself. These are not songs of celebration, but rather of respect and remembrance, a way to honor the sea's power and the fragile balance they live within. You watch as Frates kneels beside a small pool, gently shaking the lantern's frame to steady the flame. Her fingers trace patterns in the mud, marking spots where the salt is richest or where shellfish hide just beneath the surface. The seaweed around her moves softly with the water's breath, brushing her knees like the touch of old friends. Nearby, Torsten sets a series of woven reed traps deeper into the channel. His hands work with deliberate care, positioning each one so the tides will carry fish and eels right into their narrow openings. His face, weathered and lined like driftwood, reflects the lantern light, eyes steady and knowing. The soft sounds of water lapping and reeds rustling fill the space between the low voices. You can almost feel the pulse of the tides beneath the earth, a slow, eternal heartbeat that guides this hidden world. As dawn slowly unfolds, the lantern's flames grow steadier, casting longer shadows that stretch like delicate fingers across the mudflats. Fratus stands and adjusts her cloak against the chill, her breath rising in gentle puffs that mingle with the sea air. Solveig stoops to gather a handful of salt-encrusted stones, their surfaces rough and glistening with tiny shells. She passes them to her mother, who examines them carefully before placing them in a shallow basket. Leaf wanders toward a small cluster of driftwood, his fingers tracing the rough bark as he listens to the distant cry of a curlew. The boy's world is filled with small wonders, the taste of salt on his lips, the softness of sea foam, the coolness of wet sand beneath his feet. The family moves back toward their sod hut as the sun rises, painting the sky in pale shades of rose and gold. Their steps are slow, carrying the weight of the morning's work, but also the quiet joy of shared purpose. Inside the hut, the fire crackles softly, filling the room with a gentle warmth that wraps around them like a familiar blanket. Freitis lays out the salt and fish, preparing for the day's preservation. The ritual is quiet but precise, cleaning, drying, and storing each precious gift from the sea with care. Solveig sorts small bundles of seaweed and rush cords, tying them neatly for future use. Leaf plays near the hearth, his laughter soft and light, weaving its way through the stillness like a delicate thread. As the afternoon deepens, the family ventures out again to check on drying fish and gather more driftwood. The marsh's quiet expanse stretches endlessly around them, a living canvas painted with shifting hues of green, blue, and silver. The tide is beginning to turn, slow and deliberate, pulling at the earth's edge and carrying away footprints, secrets and stories alike. Lanterns are stowed away until nightfall, when their gentle glow will once again guide the harvesters in their silent dance with the sea. As twilight deepens, the family gathers by the hearth once more. The soft crackle of fire and the muted tones of whispered songs create a cocoon of peace and belonging. You feel the slow rhythm of their lives, the ebb and flow of labor and rest, the delicate balance of giving and taking, the enduring connection between sea and soul. What quiet wisdom do these salt harvesters hold, etched in the creases of their weathered hands and the steady beat of their hearts? What stories lie hidden beneath the surface of their everyday rituals, waiting to be uncovered? In the soft glow of lantern light, evening whispers and tides the twilight gathers softly over the marshes once more, a delicate curtain drawn across the wide expanse of salt and sea. The fading light paints the sky in gentle washes of lavender and pale amber, while a cool breeze carries the subtle scent of brine and peat smoke. The world feels hushed, as if holding its breath, waiting for the quiet stories that only the night can tell. Within the sod hut, the family settles after the long day's labor. The hearth fire burns low but steady, casting flickering shadows that dance across the rough walls. Painted with simple carvings and bundles of dried herbs, the air holds a comforting warmth, a small island of light and life in the vastness of the marsh. Freydis leans against the wooden bench, her hands resting on a small basket filled with freshly dried fish, the texture of the woven reeds beneath. Her fingers is familiar and soothing, like a well-loved melody that drifts through time. She breathes slowly, feeling the tiredness in her limbs, but also the quiet satisfaction that comes from a day spent in harmony with the tides. Solveig sits nearby, her fingers tracing delicate patterns on the wooden table, worn smooth by years of touch. Her eyes are soft and distant, reflecting the glow of the fire and the flickering lantern that hangs from the low ceiling. The child's small hand reaches out to touch a bundle of rush cords, as if seeking connection to the silent threads that bind her family to the land and sea. Leaf, now nearly asleep, curls up on a fur near the hearth, the rhythm of his slow breaths blending seamlessly with the crackling fire. His dreams are laced with salt spray and moonlight, with the gentle lullaby of waves caressing distant shores. Torsten moves quietly, stacking last night's driftwood near the door. His movements are deliberate, each one a slow echo of the steady tides. He pauses briefly to gaze out into the darkness, where the vast marsh meets the horizon in an endless line of shadow and starlight. Outside, the moon rises, pale and serene, casting silver light over the salt flats and weaving a shimmering path across the water. The lanterns have been extinguished, their soft flames snuffed against the coming night, but their glow lingers in memory, a beacon of hope and guidance through the mist. The family's voices are low and gentle, sharing stories of the day's small miracles, the perfect salt crystal found, the trap that yielded an unexpected catch, the quiet moments when the sea seemed to speak just for them. These words carry no urgency, no need for loudness. Instead, they ripple softly like the tidal pools beyond the door. Frates recalls the old tales told by her grandmothers, stories of sea spirits who watched over the harvesters, of hidden lanterns beneath the waves that led lost sailors safely. Home, of salt as a sacred gift that held the power to preserve not just food, but memory itself as she speaks. Solveig listens with wide eyes, absorbing each word as if it were a precious seed planted deep in the fertile soil of her imagination. Leaf stirs slightly, a faint smile crossing his lips as the warmth of family and fire seeps into his dreams. The night stretches on, thick with quiet and the subtle music of nature's breath. The gentle rustle of rushes in the wind, the distant call of an owl, the steady, patient pulse of the tide returning to claim its place along the shore, all blend into a serene symphony that lulls the household deeper into stillness. You feel yourself drawn into this timeless moment, the delicate balance between labor and rest, light and shadow, sea and sky. The simple act of living hereof, tending to salt, fire, and family becomes a meditation, a soft thread weaving through the fabric of existence. Outside, a lantern flickers once more in the distance, a lone light carried by a silent figure. Moving slowly across the marsh, the harvest continues, quietly and without haste, guided by the rhythms of the earth and the sea. What secrets does the night hold for those who listen? What gentle wisdom flows with the tides, waiting to be heard? In the hush between heartbeats, with that, the fire dims to embers, the world softens into shadow, and the marsh holds its breath once again beneath the watchful gaze of the moon. Good night, quiet tides. Good night, glowing lanterns. Good night, salt and silence. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 5. The slow art of tea in ancient China leaves, and whispers in a quiet garden, good evening, friends. Dim your lights and settle under a warm blanket as we journey softly into a forgotten garden nestled beneath the misty mountains of ancient China, where tea leaves whisper secrets to those who listen patiently. You find yourself stepping lightly along a narrow, winding path bordered by moss-covered stones and delicate bamboo shoots swaying gently in the breeze. The air carries a faint, earthy scent, damp soil mingled with the sweet fragrance of camellia blossoms, delicate petals resting like quiet prayers on the ground. Ahead, a small pavilion emerges from the meester shelter crafted from pale wood and paper screens, its edges softened by climbing ivy and the gentle touch of time. Inside, an old master sits cross-legged on a woven mat, his eyes closed as if in deep meditation. His hands rest lightly on a simple wooden table, where a set of small porcelain bowls waits patiently. The garden hums with life in subtle, slow rhythms, the distant drip of water from a bamboo spout, the faint rustle of leaves brushing against each other. the soft coo of a dove resting among the branches. Here, every sound is a gentle invitation to pause, to breathe, to be fully present in the unfolding moment. The master opens his eyes slowly, a serene smile touching his lips. He reaches for a small, hand-rolled ball of tea leaves, lifting it carefully as if cradling a precious treasure. The leaves unfurl with quiet grace when steeped, releasing a soft, fragrant steam that mingles with the cool morning air. You watch as he pours hot water over the leaves, the amber liquid swirling in the bowl like liquid gold. The first sip is gentle, almost shy, carrying hints of sun-warmed earth, distant mountain rain, and the lingering sweetness of spring blossoms. He gestures for you to sit beside him, inviting you into the slow ritual that has been passed down through countless generations. Each movement lifting the bowl, breathing in the aroma, sipping the teas, deliberate and unhurried. A dance of mindfulness and respect. Outside the pavilion, a young apprentice tends to the garden, carefully trimming bonsai trees and arranging smooth stones along the path. Her fingers move with practiced ease, shaping nature's forms with quiet reverence. She pauses to listen to the master's soft instructions, her eyes bright with the promise of learning. Nearby, a gentle stream meanders through the garden, its clear waters reflecting the dappled light filtering through the leaves. Dragonflies skim the surface, their iridescent wings catching the sun like tiny, fluttering jewels. As you sit with the master, you feel the tension of the outside world begin to melt away, replaced by a growing sense of calm and connection. The slow art of tea becomes a meditation, each sip a thread woven into a tapestry of stillness and presence. The master shares stories of the tea's origins, the ancient hills where wild camellia bushes first grew, the monks who discovered its calming properties, and the gardens carefully cultivated to honor the plant's spirit. These tales drift like soft petals on the breeze, inviting you to wander deeper into the quiet landscape of history and ritual. Time slows. Further, as you explore the garden's hidden cornerstone lanterns nestled among ferns, carved wooden, bridges arching over koi ponds, and the gentle ripple of water caressed by soft wind. Each detail holds a silent story, a reminder that beauty often resides in the simplest things. The apprentice returns with a fresh pot of tea, the steam rising in gentle spirals. Together, you share another round, savoring the subtle differences in flavor and the warmth that spreads with each swallow as the afternoon light begins to fade. The master stands and moves to light a slender incense stick, its fragrant smoke curling upward like a whispered prayer. The scent mingles with the garden's natural aromas, creating a soothing, sacred space. You feel yourself drawn deeper into the moment, your breath aligning with the slow rhythm of the garden. The world outside becomes a distant memory, replaced by the quiet wisdom of leaves and whispers. What lessons does this slow art teach us about patience, presence, and the gentle unfolding of time? What quiet joys might we discover if we too learn to sip life slowly, savoring each breath as though it were a cup of warm tea? As the sun dips behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the garden, you rise with a heart full of calm and a mind ready to rest. Good night, quiet leaves. Good night, gentle whispers. Good night, slow, soothing moments. The rituals beneath the willow-ass, the soft light of morning filters through the thin paper screens of the pavilion. The garden breathes gently around you. The air is cool and still, touched faintly with the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. Outside, the willow branches sway slowly, their long tendrils brushing the surface of a still koi pond, sending gentle ripples that catch the sunlight like scattered diamonds. You sit once more beside the tea master, whose serene presence feels like a quiet anchor in this peaceful world. His hands move with practiced ease, arranging the small porcelain bowls in a delicate pattern that seems to honor the balance of nature itself. Each vessel, simple yet elegant, is a quiet work of artist's curved edges, softened by centuries of human touch. The master begins the ritual by carefully selecting fresh leaves, plucked early that morning from the garden's camellia bushes. He places them in a small bamboo basket, their vibrant green hues promising the life and warmth they will soon release. As he lifts the basket, a faint rustling sound fills the silence, like a whisper from the earth itself. You notice the apprentice, nearby, moving quietly to light a charcoal brazier. The soft crackle of the burning embers mingles with the garden's natural chorus, the distant call of a bird. The gentle splash of water, the rustle of leaves stirred by a barely there breeze. Each sound is a delicate thread woven into this tapestry of stillness. The master pours water from a slender clay teapot into a small kettle, its surface mottled with soft earth tones. The water begins to warm, steam rising slowly in thin tendrils that twist and curl like the smoke of incense. He watches it carefully, knowing that the temperature will shape the tea's flavor, its essence unfolding only when treated with gentle respect. As the kettle's whistle sounds softly, the apprentice brings forward a fresh tray of small cups, each arranged with quiet precision. The master lifts the bamboo basket once more, releasing the fragrant leaves into a shallow porcelain bowl, where they will steep and release their hidden gifts. You breathe in deeply, catching the subtle notes of the tether faint sweetness of spring blossoms, the clean, earthy undertone of rich soil, and the delicate hint of sun-warmed moss. It is a scent that feels like a secret, carried on the breath of the garden itself. The master gestures for you to lift your cup, and as you do, you feel the warmth seep into your fingers. The liquid is smooth and soft on your lips, a quiet song that unfolds slowly across your tongue. Each sip invites you deeper into the rhythm of the ritual, the dance of leaf, water, and fire. Outside, the apprentice tends the bonsai, trimming branches with care. Her movements are precise and unhurried, the scissors gliding through leaves like a brushstroke on silk. She pauses to observe the master, absorbing each gesture as though it holds a world of meaning. You notice the interplay of light and shadow as the sun climbs higher, dappling the garden floor with shifting patterns. The willow's long fingers sway gently, casting delicate lace across stone lanterns and winding paths. The koi beneath the pond's surface glide slowly, their movements creating concentric ripples that spread softly outward. The master begins to speak, his voice low and steady, weaving stories of tea's place in ancient culture. He tells of monks who used tea to awaken their minds during long meditations, of emperors who commissioned delicate porcelain to honor the beverage's sacred role, and of gardens designed to be places of contemplation and renewal. As he speaks, you feel time stretch and soften, each word a petal unfolding in slow motion. The stories are not grand tales of conquest or triumph, but quiet reflections on patience, respect, and the subtle beauty of everyday life. The apprentice returns with a small scroll, carefully unrolling it to reveal delicate calligraphy that traces the ancient poems dedicated to tea. The characters seem to dance on the paper, each stroke a quiet meditation, each word a sigh in the stillness. You watch as the master selects a single verse, reading it aloud with gentle reverence. The language is soft and flowing, painting images of mountain mist, flowing streams, and the gentle scent of brewing leaves. The poem becomes a bridge, connecting you across centuries to those who found peace in the simple act of tea. As the ritual draws to a close, the master cleans the bowls with tender care, each movement a final bow to the day's unfolding. The apprentice arranges the tools neatly, the bamboo whisk and ladle resting like old friends beside the teapot. You rise slowly, feeling the quiet energy of the garden settle around you like a soft shawl. The world beyond this place seems distant, wrapped in noise and haste, while here, time breathes deeply and gently before you leave. The master offers a final thought. That tea is more than a drink, it is a teacher, a path to mindfulness and balance. A reminder that the slow moments carry their own kind of power as you step back onto the winding path. The willow leaves brush softly against your cheek, a whisper of nature's blessing. The garden fades behind you, but its calm lingers, a gentle echo in your heart. What small rituals in your own life might offer a quiet refuge? What gifts could be found in the simple act of slowing down and savoring the present? The path leads onward, but for now, the garden and its slow art remain a quiet sanctuary in the fading light. Evening reflections in the garden as the sun lowers itself behind distant hills. The garden settles into a soft twilight hush. The willow branches sway gently, their slender leaves whispering stories to the cooling air. The koi pond mirrors the fading light, its surface calm and untroubled, save for the occasional ripple caused by a fish's gentle glide beneath the surface. You find yourself once again beneath the sheltering pavilion, where the tea master and his apprentice have prepared a small evening tea ceremony, a quiet ritual to close the day and invite restful calm. The air is fragrant with the delicate scent of dried jasmine blossoms and the subtle smoke of burning sandalwood incense. Its tendrils drift lazily upward, mingling with the soft glow of paper lanterns hung along the garden's edges. The light is warm, but gentle, an embrace of quiet and comfort. The master pours the warm, amber tea into slender cups, offering one to you with a slow, knowing smile. The liquid's surface shimmers faintly in the lantern light. Carrying the promise of peace and presence, you lift the cup, feeling the smooth porcelain against your lips, the warmth radiating into your hands. The first sip is soft, gentle, a quiet invitation to let go of the day's worries and simply be as you drink. The master begins to speak, his voice a soothing murmur weaving through the evening air. He tells of the long history of tea in these lands, not just as a beverage, but as a way of life, a guide to harmony and mindfulness. He shares how tea was once the companion of monks and scholars, helping to steady minds and calm restless spirits during long hours of contemplation. How gardens like this were designed not merely for beauty, but as spaces to slow the mind and open the heart. Outside, the apprentice moves gracefully, tending the small fire that keeps the water warm, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She folds the delicate paper screens with care, adjusting the pavilion's soft light as the evening deepens. You listen as the master recites an ancient poem, its lines flowing like a gentle stream. In the quiet cup, a world unfolds anew, leaves whisper softly, stories old as dew. The words seem to linger in the air, their rhythm syncing with your own breathing, guiding you into a deeper stillness. Around you, the garden breathes a living, breathing poem of stone, water, leaf, and light. The scent of jasmine lingers, mingling with the earthiness of moss and the faint saltiness carried from distant shores by the evening breeze. You notice the small details, the gentle rustle of silk on the apprentice's sleeves, the soft clink of porcelain bowls set carefully on the wooden tray, the steady crackle of the fire. Each sound is a note in this serene symphony. The master speaks softly of balance, the harmony between water and leaf, heat and patience, motion and stillness. How the art of tea teaches acceptance of impermanence, the beauty in each fleeting moment. You feel a gentle warmth spreading through you, not just from the tea, but from the connection to this ancient ritual, this quiet dance of senses and spirit. The night deepens, stars beginning to peek through the velvet sky. The garden's lanterns glow steadily, their light a soft beacon in the darkening world. You lean back, allowing the calm to wash over you like a gentle tide. Thoughts slow, the mind unclutters, and you find yourself drifting, carried by the slow rhythm of tea, of nature, of time itself. What moments of quiet grace have you noticed today? What simple rituals might carry you gently through the night? As the ceremony concludes, the master offers a final bow, a gesture of gratitude and peace. The apprentice extinguishes the last lantern with a soft breath, leaving only the stars and the quiet world beneath them. You rise slowly, feeling wrapped in the garden's calm, carrying its whisper into your own evening, your own dreams. Good night, gentle leaves. Good night, whispered stories. Good night, slow and steady heartbeats. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place.